Hello beautiful souls, and welcome to another episode of 10-Minute Bed Talks. Really excited to share this one with you today because this is a topic I feel really passionately about and I really want to share this with you. So we're going to be talking about intangible grief or loss, specifically focused on loss of identity. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, then let the magic begin. So if you're new to this series, this is 10-Minute Bed Talks, where I spend 10 minutes with you sharing a topic that is interesting or just a bit different from what I would usually talk about. It really is 10 minutes for us to explore that together, whether that's from a therapist perspective or a soul perspective or just an interesting perspective. It's just designed for something to raise awareness about a topic or just give you something interesting to listen to throughout the day. So let me just set my 10-minute timer. Hopefully they won't jump like I did last time. Great. So we are talking about intangible grief or intangible loss, which I feel really passionately about actually, because I think this is a side of grief or loss that is perhaps not as well known. Maybe it's not as mainstream for some people, and it certainly isn't mainstream in modern or Western medicine. I think because it's intangible, professionals, let's say, don't make it a priority when I think it really ought to be. So intangible grief really is when you cannot see the thing that's lost, right? So last time we talked about tangible grief, which is the loss of a loved one, whereas intangible grief or loss is really about that side of things that you can't see. And we're really focusing on one today, which is loss of identity. So that can happen just so many ways throughout your life, or perhaps this will resonate more with a friend or a loved one of yours, so please do share if it does. But loss of identity, I think, is quite a profound element of loss that we often overlook, and that's why I really wanted to talk about it with you today. And intangible loss can show up in different ways in your life. So it could be perhaps you work for the same company for, 30, 40 years, you retire, and suddenly there's this huge change of identity. Who am I now that I no longer have to go to this job? Even if you're excited to retire, when the novelty wears off, there can be an element of you that's like, oh my gosh, I'm not that person anymore who gets up at this time, does that, goes there, etc., right? Suddenly you've changed who you are. It could show up perhaps when you become a parent. It could be that no longer being, just responsible for yourself or your partner, suddenly you're responsible for a very small human and you are now a parent and you have to deal with that. And for some women, for example, if you are breastfeeding, then also your body changes identity. It's no longer just something that's sensual, but perhaps it's also parenting and nurturing as well. So there's a change in that perspective. It could also show up for you if you have a health crisis, such as cancer, for example, where you identify as one person and who you are and what you do, and suddenly you might be losing your hair through chemo, you might be unable to work, you may lose different parts of your body, whether that's internally or externally, they may change too. So all of that can change your identity, and it can be such a huge shift, a huge thing to come to terms with, to work towards accepting and feeling okay with, and that can take a really long time. It could also be perhaps if you are getting divorced and your relationship of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years is suddenly ending and you are now going to be single again, but not just single at a different stage of your life, single where you may have children or other things that you're responsible for, and suddenly that identity is no longer I am a spouse, it's I'm single and I'm divorced, as well as perhaps being a parent or running your own business, whatever it may be. So there can be these huge changes that happen in our life that can trigger a change of identity for us. That can trigger this intangible grief, where we can go through all the 7 states of grief, such as denial, such as anger, such as total sadness. And that process can take a short period of time, or it can just take months, if not years, for us to maybe recognize and do something about, or even just come to terms with that. There's so much about that. So I wanted to focus today on talking about loss of identity for myself, my own experience through developing a chronic health issue. And there'll be many people with chronic health issues who will resonate with this on some level. And it's totally okay if none of the examples I shared resonate with you and connect you. And I will talk about one example at the end, which is a bit of intangible and tangible grief. But I just want to focus on something I can share with you, which is my experience. So let me just take you back to when I first experienced migraine episodes. And at first I just thought something was maybe off hormonally for me, and that eventually it would just sort itself out through acupuncture or diet or whatever it may be. It was only about a year later, when I became chronic with migraine, that I had to go on a preventative medication, and suddenly I became aware that I'm not the person I was anymore. I can't do the things I used to do. I can't go to the cinema, I can't go to the gym, I can't even exercise, let alone go to the gym. I can't read a book, I can't be around light. All of these things suddenly I became aware of when I went on this preventative medicine, and it took a while for me to acknowledge that. And that's partly because I was in such a deep space of resistance and denial, and part of that was because I didn't even understand I was chronic for a while. I went on this preventative medication. I remember I had thought in my head I would take this preventative medication for a year. Hopefully that will mean that my brain will just forget how to make a migraine episode in that time, and I can come off it and carry on, because I'm not really somebody who would take a lot of chemicals or medication. And suddenly I had this realization, oh my god, not only am I chronic, but it will not just be a year that I'm on this medication, it will probably be for longer. And I was in such a deep space of denial and resistance at first. And you know how you can watch stuff on TV where maybe there's a news report about somebody who's, I don't know, had a stroke or a car accident or something, and it's altered their life perhaps for whatever reason, and they now, like, I don't know, run for charity or work on a charity or set up a charity, I don't know, whatever. They always kind of talk about the positives. They're always like, oh, this happened, but guess what, like, now I'm doing this and it's amazing and I love it. But very often they kind of skirt around the period of time of acceptance, coming to terms with it, acknowledging that you're no longer the person you used to be, you're no longer capable of what you used to be capable of. You're going to have to go through a period of healing and change and growth to eventually get to that stage. And it's such a shock to the system. And it took me nearly 2 years and lots of therapy to even be able to accept that I had a chronic illness, or several chronic illnesses, and that I had all these things to deal with and all these changes, and my identity was so different and I couldn't do the things I wanted to do anymore. And it was so hard, and it was so difficult to recognize that about myself, because I was so used to this healthy version of myself, and I was so used to being in complete control and command of my body and my abilities and just doing whatever I wanted, to suddenly recognizing limitations that I now had and things that were holding me back. It was really difficult. I was no longer this, yeah, you want to go on a road trip, let's just go and do it kind of person. Not that I did that very often, but I could have done. To suddenly being like, I can't drive, could you come and pick me up? Can you meet me in this place because there's no lights here? Can I wear my sunglasses, hats and earplugs all the time when I leave the house, if I leave the house? Suddenly my world shrank, but also my identity changed. And I now think of it as Marilyse before migraine and Marilyse during migraine, and that's where I'm at the moment. It's really difficult to acknowledge those changes, and sometimes they're very subtle, and sometimes we acknowledge them on maybe an unconscious or subconscious level more so than on a conscious level, and that's absolutely fine. If any of the examples I gave resonate with you, that's totally normal. It's okay. If there are other examples I haven't given, but you feel that you've had a change of identity and you're going through that loss of identity and that grief and that change, that's also completely okay. I've only got 10 minutes here to share this topic with you, and it's a huge topic. It takes this long process of becoming okay with something, accepting something that perhaps you never thought you would have to accept. And of course, if you can work with a therapist or a healer, I found cognitive behavioral training therapy really helpful. You might find something else that's really helpful. But working through that with the support of somebody else allows you to move through that grief, through that change, through that loss in a more loving, compassionate way. And then you can start to get to know the person. Then you can start to get to know the person you are becoming. And I can guarantee you that person will be just as beautiful, just as talented, just as intelligent, just as funny, just as kind as the person you were before, but it'll just be slightly different. It'll be a newer version of you. For some of you may feel it's an upgrade. For others, you may feel that, okay, I can't do exactly what I used to do in the past, but I can still do a lot of things, and that brings me joy, that brings me what I need in the day. So I said at the end, I just wanted to mention one other form of intangible loss or grief which has a tangible element to it, and I want to talk about camera just stopped there. So I want to talk about changing gender. So for somebody who grows up, for example, as a boy and just is aware that actually they feel strongly they are a girl, they change gender, that is a form of change of identity, but also it's a tangible change. If you physically are changing from a boy to a girl to a boy, becoming androgynous, whatever resonates more for you, that has a tangible element to it, but there is a huge change of identity there. So there's also the intangible element, and part of that is tangible because you are seeing yourself change from one gender to another, and so you can physically see changes too. So it is probably the more tangible element of change of identity, but there will be an inner change of identity too, and it's really important to honor that inner journey for all of the examples that I've given, but also for this one. Really find somebody who can support and guide you through this. If this resonates with you today, please just give it a like, share it with somebody else. It's so important that we understand these different types of grief and loss that we can experience in our lives, and then we can do something about it. We can become empowered in that situation, and that is where the healing and the growth really lies. So I hope that you've enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.